Now look, before I get started on this video, I am aware that I have not posted within a month because number one, I've been busy with school and also I've been busy with work, so I could not find any time to at least make a video. But now here I am. Originally, also, I planned on doing this video last week or actually a couple weeks prior, but the thing is, again, life has been really busy for me lately, so I simply could not find the time to at least make a video. But now, here it is. Yo, what's good, guys? It's X once again, and now I'm here to talk about the LA Clippers and what this season could mean for them and how this offseason could affect them throughout the season and all that other stuff. Let's just get into it already. As the title of this video suggests, this offseason was definitely an interesting one for the LA Clippers. After being one of the more recognized Cinderella stories of the NBA, making the conference finals without Kawhi Leonard after being injured in Game 4 versus the Utah Jazz, and being 2 wins away from reaching their first NBA Finals, the Clippers had, again, a really interesting offseason, starting with the Pat Beverly and Rajon Rondo to the Memphis Grizzlies trade. Obviously, Pat was moved to Minnesota, and Rondo came back to the LA Lakers. That deal also landed them Eric Bledsoe, who had a pretty down year in New Orleans, but they were able to sign some of their more core pieces, or at least their new core pieces, after trading away Pat Beverly and Lou Williams and letting Montrezl Harrell walk last free agency. They were able to re-sign Reggie Jackson, Kawhi Leonard, and Nick Batum, as well as Serge Ibaka. Now, as for the Bledsoe trade, I'm going to assume that they're not going to trade him right now because they're trying to see if he's still a valuable enough player, because a lot of my friends and I have both agreed that Eric Bledsoe has had his playoff flameouts with Milwaukee. I mean, why else would they trade Drew Holiday for him, who would win the NBA championship this year? You know what I mean? But no, seriously, I'm assuming they're keeping Bledsoe to see if he's worthy enough to be, I don't want to say a replacement for Pat Bev, but at least give more production. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're trying to keep him to see what he's really worth. And if he plays good, the Clippers may consider keeping him. And if he doesn't, they may think about putting him in trade rumors for, let's say, John Wall. But even then, I do believe the Clippers may regret making this deal, or at least trading Pat Bev for Eric Bledsoe, because even though on paper it would suggest that Eric Bledsoe is a much better player than Patrick Beverly, and I think Skip Bayless put it best, Pat Beverly made notable defensive plays. Everybody remembers the block or strip he had on LeBron during the Christmas Day game in 2019, but more notably what he did defensively against Donovan Mitchell and especially Devin Booker in the conference finals. Whereas Eric Bledsoe, on the other hand, did not make the Bucks any better because he was a black hole on offense, and defensively he contributed so little. So that's why I feel like that trade needed to happen, but I didn't feel like Eric Bledsoe is going to be the answer. But that's basically my take on why they're probably keeping him for now. They're going to see what he's worth and how he does, and if he's not doing well, they're going to use him in a trade package for, again, John Wall as an ideal return, I guess you can say. Now, enough of what the Clippers did during the offseason. Let's discuss what the expectations are for this team this upcoming year. I can tell y'all right now that I do not expect them to be a finals contender, let alone a conference finals contender, because of the fact Kawhi Leonard is injured. And for that reason, I can say that there's not going to be as much pressure on them because of the fact Kawhi Leonard's out. They're not going to have the same pressure that the Brooklyn Nets and the LA Lakers have. Their real, I guess, question mark is, can they hold up a full season potentially without having Kawhi for said full season? I personally think they can do it, given that Tyronn Lue is one of the more better head coaches in the NBA. He's definitely a top 5 to top 10 head coach after what we saw in these playoffs, along with Monty Williams and Nate McMillan. Also, you have Paul George, who has played like an MVP candidate during his days with Indiana and Oklahoma City, as well as Mr. June, Reggie Jackson, and a guy like Marcus Morris Sr. And there'll still be a really solid defensive team because they still have guys like Nick Batum, Serge Ibaka, and a much more improving Terrence Mann. I do want to say this though. Because of the fact Kawhi Leonard is not on the team due to injury, that puts pressure on Paul George. Not like monumental, can he win a championship without Kawhi type of pressure. Again, not the pressure that the Brooklyn Nets and the LA Lakers have, and to a certain extent, maybe the Milwaukee Bucks, because they're the defending champions. But I do believe Paul George is going to have to put this team on his shoulders, and I believe he can do it. The Clippers moved mountains to basically get him and to get Kawhi as well. And I do believe with my whole heart that PG can pull it off. Again, he did it in Oklahoma City. And what I do expect from Paul George is to average at least 23 to 27 a game, which is solid for a player of his caliber. 30 points a game is a stretch, and that may be too much to ask for. Maybe keeping it 23 to 27 to even 28 points a game is fair enough for a player of his caliber. Now, what about Reggie Jackson? I do expect Mr. June to average at least 15, 16 points with a good 4 rebounds and 6 assists a game, because Reggie Jackson is a really solid playmaker and he's a decent rebounder for his height and wingspan. Now let's move on and switch gears to Marcus Morris Sr., aka the Clippers X Factor. Last year, Marcus Morris was one of their better 3-point shooters, and he had a solid enough playoffs. In the words of Skip Bayless, it felt like the Clippers went as Marcus Morris went, because if Marcus had a good game or a game where he shot 50% or better, the Clippers seemed to win that game every single time. Of course, outside of Game 6, but that was, again, that whole Clipper team coming out flat after having all these quick turnarounds in the playoffs, etc., etc., etc. Now, in those playoff games, Marcus Morris showed you that when you insert him into the offense, he is a really solid third option. In Game 7 against the Mavs, he had 23 points off of 7 threes. In Game 5 versus Utah, he had 25 points shooting 4 threes, but he had a lot of off-the-dribble shots, and he was making his way to the paint. And then obviously those 2 closeout games against Phoenix, he played really well. Now, why am I bringing these games up? Well, that's mainly because a player of Marcus's caliber is capable of having scoring binges like this. In his season with New York prior to the 2020 trade deadline, he was a 19 point per game scorer, and he actually did well in the 43 games he played with the Knicks. He shot 44% from the field, 44% from 3, and 82% from the free throw line. And that's why the Clippers traded Mo Harkless, who was argued to be one of their better defenders at the time, for a guy like Marcus Morris, who can be served as a solid two-way player. Maybe not like a spot-up 3-and-D guy, but a guy that can wreak some havoc offensively and be a solid enough defensive presence while in the game. Now, this year, Marcus is going to be the third option for the LA Clippers. The 2 main options are Paul George and Bobby Shmurda. Now, as a Laker fan, I don't want to put too much pressure on Marcus Morris to be an all-star for this Clipper team, but I do believe that he can be a solid enough third option to a point where you just have to simply trust him as your third option. I think Marcus will have a season where he'll average around, I guess, a fair 15 to 17 a game. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility, especially with a player of his caliber who can be a solid enough two-way player. So yeah, those are my expectations for Marcus Morris, is to keep being the consistent 3-point shooter that he was in the regular season, and have more games like the ones that I mentioned in the playoffs, or at least have games where he can be a solid enough presence on the floor without being a black hole on either end. By the way, when I heard Marcus Morris say that the Clippers would have won if he were healthy, all I had to say was this: boy, if you don't. Yeah, I don't think I need to talk about that. But anyways, back to our regularly scheduled programming. What do I expect from the other role players? Obviously, I expect Batum to be the solid presence that he has been throughout his career, but especially this past year with the LA Clippers, be a solid Swiss Army knife that can do basically everything you can ask him to do. The only question mark I do have is Serge Ibaka, because he's been having nagging back injuries and he has been a bit more injury prone than we're used to seeing. So maybe that could take away some of the defensive firepower that he's had throughout his whole career. Now, Terrence Mann is an interesting case because I've seen his highlights in Florida State and his highlights during the playoffs, and I was like, man, this kid is special. No pun intended on the man part, by the way. Now, I talked about this with my friends, and I told them that his floor is basically being an Alex Caruso level player, even though Alex for us was a starter, and he was starting in the finals matchups when we were facing the Heat. And when we needed Alex to clamp up the other team's best player, he was there to do that. But I do feel like Terrence Mann can match that type of production that Alex brings on the offensive end, especially for the Bulls currently. Now, in terms of the ceiling, I see him being a Marcus Smart and a Drew Holiday type of player, because Terrence Mann, not only he is a really solid defender who I believe will get better, he can show you that he's a solid enough scorer too. Of course, I don't want to let that 39-point game fool us, but I've seen some of his defensive highlights. Well, not only that, but some of his offensive highlights. He is a raw offensive talent, and I feel like that with enough time and dedication and development, he could be a guy that can give you double-digit numbers when it comes to scoring, while doing the little things outside of scoring and the little things that don't show up in the box score, like a Marcus Smart and a Drew Holiday. We saw what Drew Holiday did these playoffs, and we've seen what Marcus Smart can do. And I believe if Terrence takes more time and develops his game even more, I believe he'll be at his floor this year, but down the line, I think he will hit his ceiling as well. Now, what do I expect from this Clipper team as a whole? Well, in totality, I do not expect Kawhi to return at all this season. Now, I've heard rumors, and he's even said that he is hinting a possible return at some point during the year, but those are more hearsay rumors, and who knows? If he does return this year, I will be utterly shocked. But for the time being, considering it is a partially torn ACL, and I'm not a doctor nor an expert on how the body works, that stuff is up to those people, and you can ask them about it if you don't like what I'm about to say, I guess. But based on the research I did, a partially torn ACL does take 7 months to heal. So let's say even if Kawhi is cleared for basketball activities during the month of, let's say, January, February, or even March, that does not necessarily mean he's going to return as soon as he's cleared. He has to still get his rhythm, his timing, and his conditioning under him. It's similar to what the Warriors are doing with Klay Thompson. Now, you can make an argument that this upcoming Tuesday, Klay Thompson should be able to return to basketball on opening night, but the Warriors are trying to take their time with him because they don't want him to re-injure himself, and they want him to get his rhythm and his timing and his conditioning under him. And I don't think either Klay or Kawhi are just going to get it back by just being thrown into the fire like that. Now, Kawhi is a wait and see type of thing, but as of right now, without Kawhi, I do expect the Clippers, at least ceiling for this year, to be 4th, 5th in the West, and their floor to be at least 6th or 7th, which considering the circumstances with them and what's going on in the Western Conference, I don't think that's too much of an exaggeration to put them in that tier of, I guess you can say, standings. Now, I know that you're going to have teams like the Denver Nuggets and the Utah Jazz, and obviously the Lakers, Warriors, the Suns, whatever, what have you, the Dallas Mavericks, the Memphis Grizzlies, again, whatever, what have you. But that doesn't mean the Clippers are a shit team just because A, they don't have Kawhi Leonard, and B, players have had bad playoff chokes in the past. They are still a solid enough team to be a really decent under the radar team. Obviously with Kawhi, that narrative changes and they should be treated as contenders. But until then, they are just a solid under the radar team that can, pull out some games that, I don't know, when you least expect it, if that makes enough sense for y'all. Now, that is my video on the Clippers. I am extremely sorry that I have not posted a video like this in quite a while. I've been dealing with some personal things. I've been dealing with school, so I haven't really had time to upload videos on a consistent basis, but I'm going to try to get back to that, and this is basically my welcome back video. I don't know, man. But yeah, just to let y'all know why I haven't uploaded, and I'll basically be saying the same thing in the description below, but that does not matter. Yeah, that's the end of this video. I'm X. Deuces.